October 8th, 2001.
Day 2 of the war in Afghanistan. And as the U.S. continues the fight abroad,
well, of course, the attacks are just one small part. These raids are one small part of the entire effort.
How do you prepare for the battle at home?
Strengthen and help protect our transportation systems, our food and water systems, and our critical infrastructure.
All customers will be allowed just one piece of carry-on baggage. And
we want people to have preparations and not panic.
I don't think that the terrorist attacks are over.
Tonight, guarding the home front as America fights back.
From ABC News, this is Nightline. Reporting from Washington, Ted Koppel.
This war is not going to be done with quickly. It is not going to be won easily, and there will be some form of retaliation here on the home front. Those are not the gloomy assessments of anti-war activists. They are the hard realities being laid out for the American public by some of the very men who bear the responsibility of leading the war effort. Speaking on this second day of U.S. bombing and missile strikes, Defense Secretary Rumsfeld acknowledged their limitations. It is unlikely, he said, that the airstrikes will rock the Taliban back on their heels. They have very few targets that are of high value, that are manageable from the air, end quote. The conflict, said Mr. Rumsfeld, is much like the Cold War in that it may take years and that it'll need to be fought on many fronts. America's most vulnerable front clearly will be here at home, where we can expect more terrorist attacks and a diminished sense of security. More on that subject in general and those 2 anthrax cases in Boca Raton, Florida in particular, later in the broadcast. But we begin by looking at that bombing campaign over Afghanistan, which seems to be ending almost as quickly as it began. Joining us from the Pentagon, National Security Correspondent John Mcwethy. It seems as though the bombing campaign is almost over. How come, and what's next?
Almost over. It's just begun, but they are already discovering, Ted, that there are so few targets worth spending the money to drop a bomb on that after just a few days, they may have to call a pause, see if there are any other targets that need to be struck. What comes next? Probably a very long and almost invisible phase of this, and this is when American Special Operations Forces move quietly into Afghanistan and begin a long process of surveillance.
John, we know that there are about 1,000 U.S. troops just north of Afghanistan and Uzbekistan. Today, the government of Tajikistan said that it was prepared to let the United States use facilities there. What are those people going to be used for?
The very large number of troops already in Uzbekistan, more than 1,000, a lot of those are just going to provide security for a base. What's going to be in the base? The government of Uzbekistan is saying they're going to be using special operations forces for search and rescue for American downed pilots, if there ever is such a thing. However, other Pentagon sources say that is going to be a major operating base for a number of different types of special operations troops. They will be going into Afghanistan. They will be doing surveillance of the roads and surveillance of suspected areas where Osama bin Laden and his followers are in operation.
Very, very quickly, John, it looks as though we've seen pretty much what we're going to see. I mean, from here on in, it's really below the radar.
It is going to be below the radar. In fact, a lot of the bombing campaign has been below the radar as well. But what now is going to happen will be virtually invisible and very difficult for the public or the press to judge whether it is a success or not.
John Mcwethy, thanks very much. This battle against terrorism has brought a host of new U.S. allies. One of the most important and precariously placed is Pakistan's President Pervez Musharraf. In Islamabad tonight, here's ABC's Dan Harris.
On September 10th, Pervez Musharraf was the unelected military president of a pariah nation. On September 11th, he became a central player, however reluctant, in a global alliance against terrorism. Not an easy transition. This morning, for example, President Musharraf tried again to reassure the citizens of the world's second-largest Muslim country about the wisdom of supporting an attack upon a Muslim nation right next door.
This operation should not be perceived as a war against Afghanistan or the people of Afghanistan, the Afghans. It's an action against terrorism, and their sanctuaries.
At virtually the same moment, protests, some of them violent, in the streets of major cities such as Islamabad, Peshawar, and Quetta. Musharraf is a man in the middle, caught between domestic demands from fundamentalist Muslims and massive international pressure from the likes of British Prime Minister Tony Blair. He's also contending with a growing refugee problem, a sputtering economy, an enormously unstable Afghanistan to his west, and a perennially hostile India to his east. Musharraf negotiates the conflicting worlds smoothly, switching between military uniforms, traditional Pakistani garb, and Western suits, depending on the audience. But at times, he looks like a man bearing a heavy load. Nonetheless, analysts say Musharraf has a firm grip on power. He's just reshuffled the military, replacing two top generals thought to be too hardline, too pro-Taliban. And the protesters may not pose much of a threat to his authority.
Thus far, President Musharraf seems to be having reasonable success dealing with the Islamic fundamentalists. There are protests, such as this one, but by Pakistani standards, they are relatively small and controlled.
Because you do not show the majority of the people who are silently supporting, you know, and wanting desperately that peace and stability should return to this region.
While it may sound surprising to some in the West, many Pakistanis feel Musharraf's bloodless coup in 1999 actually saved them from a chaotic and corrupt civil government. Right now, Musharraf offers more promise for the U.S. than any other leader in the region. It may be a shotgun wedding, but Musharraf has been transformed from a dictator to be kept at arm's length to a vital ally overnight.
And joining us now from Islamabad, where it is already Tuesday morning, ABC News correspondent Dan Harris. Dan, television has a certain magnifier effect, so that occasionally you look at things like these street demonstrations and you come to believe that Pakistan is coming apart at the seams. How bad is it?
It's really not that bad. As you say, there is a magnifier effect. It's very tempting to show these pictures of these protests and to make it look like the country is riven by strife. Yesterday, there were sizable protests in Quetta. Those pictures have been shown throughout the Western media, and the protests did get out of control. One person was killed. Some stores and UN offices were burnt and vandalized and looted. Having said that, though, by Pakistani standards, the protests are not that bad. They were widespread throughout the country yesterday in many of the provincial capitals, Peshawar, Islamabad, where I am right now, and in Quetta. But this is a country that's running smoothly. There is, as one of the commentators I've spoken with, a silent majority that actually backs up Musharraf and his decision, which is not altogether, well, let me say, it is distasteful in some quarters, mildly, that he has decided to join with the West, but it has not divided this country. There is, by some estimates, about 15% that have pro-Taliban, pro-Osama bin Laden sentiments.
What about what is clearly the campaign coming here from Washington to reassure Muslims around the world that this is not a campaign directed against them, but a very specific, targeted campaign against the Taliban? Are people accepting that?
Musharraf is definitely making that argument on behalf of the West, and I think on behalf of himself, to make sure that the protests and the people who sympathize with the people who have hit the streets do not grow out of control. Musharraf has said time and time again that, just as Bush has said and Blair has said, that this is not an attack on the Afghani people, it's an attack on terrorism and terrorists, and that this is not an attack on Islam. There are the people who hit the streets who do believe that this is an attack on Islam and it's time for jihad. But as I said, the sense that I'm getting from the people that I've spoken to, both in the political world and those who observe the political world in a media sense, is that most people, the silent majority, do not believe that Islam is under attack here.
Dan Harris, thanks very much. Reporting from Islamabad. In the wake of the U.S. bombing raids, the question is, will terrorists retaliate? And as evidence mounts of what may be a deliberate spread of anthrax in Florida, have they retaliated already? That when we come back.
This is ABC News Nightline, brought to you by Lexus.